Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. We're recording our program a little bit early this week for various reasons, but we have plenty to report, and we hope to bring you in the second hour the first of a series highlighting various candidates for public office in the United States, but not even only that, but in the United States especially, who have taken up some aspect of the elements, more or less, of the recovery program. Remember, we are in a world economic depression of unimaginable proportions, worse than the 1930s in many respects. This is the reality. A lot of people can't see it. It's a very interesting epistemological problem, why some people can't see the existence of a depression. We have Republicans in the United States. We have a lot of petty bourgeois in Germany, right-wing petty bourgeois in Germany who just refuse to admit that we're not in normal times. But now, the leading edge is this emerging strategic crisis. Right now, the Sochi Olympics are about, 5 or 6 or so days from concluding. I think they conclude on this coming Sunday. And we've thought that at least from the Russian side, there would not be anything particular done that might get in the way of those games. But obviously, the Anglo-Americans think differently. Now, here's the specifics right now. As of this morning, we have a new round of riots in Kiev by the fascist opposition, by Yats and Yatsenyuk, candidate for prime minister, Klitschko, the punch-drunk, brain-damaged, concussed Poluka, who they want to install as puppet president. Yats would be the prime minister with his greater experience. And then, of course, Tjanibok, the Himmler, I guess, of the situation. And they had somewhat calmed down in the last couple of weeks. What happened here was on Monday, the 17th of February, President's Day here in the United States, Yanukovych executed an amnesty whereby some of the worst fascist hooligans were released from jail as an attempt to have reconciliation with these fascists. But as Sir Neville Chamberlain found out, you can't appease fascists successfully. Like blackmail, they escalate their demands. So one day after a lot of these principal hooligans were released, they're back attacking. And what they have now is uniforms. I don't know where they got these uniforms. They might have stolen them from deposits in Ukraine. They may come from Poland or the Baltic states or elsewhere. But the fact is that you now have this eerie phenomenon of the uniformed riot police and others on the side of the Ukrainian authorities, legally constituted government, UN member state, and all that. And they're being attacked by others who are not just paramilitary, but practically militarized, except that they're fascists. They're not protesters. They're criminals. But their doctrine is exquisitely fascistic. It is essentially the Waffen-SS Galicia division, which is active on that Maidan or Majdanek square. So 5 dead, and I guess these are demonstrators who got themselves killed. The problem here is Yanukovych. His policy, the only words for Yanukovych's policy is chicken Kiev. Yanukovych has got to drop the chicken Kiev and go for law and order. And anybody can see, for example, one of the requests, the defense ministry, the Ukrainian defense ministry asked the demonstrators to please stop occupying one of their buildings. Let's imagine this. So you've got demonstrators hold Lafayette Park and McPherson Square and have fortified them, and they've also taken over, let's say, the Navy Annex. How about that? Or there's an important Army building here over by Union Station. And suppose those were being held by armed demonstrators. And how long do you think that would last, right? But, of course, in Kiev, if you kick these fascists out, then you're going to be attacked by the Western media as being an oppressor. These camps, I think it's just a question of time before you get typhus, typhoid, paratyphoid in those camps. That might have a sobering effect on these on the hooligans gathered there, right? And remember, if you join that, you've essentially surrendered your political initiative to Yats and Klitschko. And we know from Nuland in her famous obscene telephone call that those are the people the U.S. wants to install as a puppet state. Lots of Molotov cocktails. Today there was a real bombardment, a barrage of Molotov cocktails. It looked like quite a few cops were getting burned. So this has essentially passed any possible limit. In the session of the Ukrainian Rada, and if you think back to previous times, that term Ukrainian Rada brings a shudder. One of the fascist parliamentarians says, in effect, that violence is the only answer, that Yanukovych and his group only understand the language of violence. This is deplorable, and I've stressed again and again, the Ukraine is more dangerous than anything in the Middle East ever possibly could be, because in Ukraine you have the immediate potential for the collision of nuclear-armed forces, Polish NATO troops coming in, or Baltic states, but Poland in particular would be inclined to meddle, and on the other hand, Russian forces assisting people in the eastern Ukraine and trying to keep the country together. And both of those could call on nuclear forces. So this is absolutely critical. Now, any rational foreign minister would focus in particular on working with an existing government, a United Nations member state, legally constituted, recognized by the United States, no problem with this, to try to empty out the square, remove the public health menace, and above all, prevent further radicalization. But that is not the line. Now, it goes together, I'm afraid, with a new drive for war in the Middle East. This is now getting to be this 1-2 punch, right? It's the 1956 Suez crisis plus the Hungarian crisis. We may be looking at something like this under much worse conditions. The Montreux-Geneva talks, second round, ended on Friday into Saturday, and have led essentially to nothing except a commitment to meet once again, and no specifics. Now, if you followed last week, we went through the attempt to relieve Homs in terms of the humanitarian catastrophe. These were blocked by the terrorist forces, the terrorist rebels, the death squads paid by Saudi Arabia, the Al-Qaeda people, the Nusra Brigade, the ISIS, and so forth. This, of course, blamed in the Western media on Assad, but now we've got new warmongering coming from Kerry and others as a result of the conclusion of the second round of the Geneva talks. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So the situation in Ukraine, once again, critical. 5 killed in Kiev, fascist gangs on the march, Molotov bottles flying, government buildings still occupied. by these fascist forces, and then the fact that this is all happening one day after an amnesty, right? Remember, Gaddafi was essentially murdered by people that he had let out of jail, and there are other examples, right? But that's the way it works. Our dear friend Belhaj, Hassadi Belhaj, had been imprisoned. Gaddafi let him out, and this then became one of the people who led the operations that led to the assassination of Gaddafi. So got to think twice before you do that. So Yanukovych, enough of the chicken Kiev. It is not in the interest of world peace for these fascist marches to continue. We don't need the fascist march on Kiev any more than we needed the fascist march on Rome in October 1922. It's similar. And you'll remember that famous quote in October 1922. General Badoglio said to the king, 5 minutes of gunfire, fascism will be over. Think what that would have meant for Europe. 5 minutes of gunfire and fascism wiped clean. That means no Mussolini, no Italian fascist dictatorship, no Hitler, because it's directly copied. So think about that, right? Think about the relative morality. Now, Syria. Here's what it is. Kerry is meddling in Asia, the mentally unbalanced and erratic, stupid son of rich parents, the silver spoon, Kerry, John Forbes Kerry of the Forbes, New England oligarchs, East India Company, opium syndicate, along with the Russells and the Perkins and the Saltonstalls and the rest of them. Kerry, out there in Indonesia, blames Russia, and he blames Russia for supporting the existing government, which the United States had recognized just like everybody else. The regime stonewalled, said Kerry. They did nothing except to continue to double down on arms against their own people. And, of course, in Kerry's world, anybody who gets killed is killed by Assad. He's in the world of the Syrian Observatory, right, run by that tailor in Coventry, England, who makes it up out of whole cloth. I guess that's why he's a tailor. So, according to Kerry, the Assad negotiating team, and I quote, refused to open up one moment of discussion during these talks. Quote, it is very clear that Bashar al-Assad is continuing to try to win this on the battlefield rather than to come to the negotiating table with good faith. Close quote. Well, again, remember, civil wars have a way of generating their own momentum, and if it's whether it's the overthrow of a central government or secessionism, you look at the American Civil War, you look at the Russian Civil War, there's often less room for compromise in a civil war than there would be in an international conflict, because the conclusion of a civil war is likely to be the political extinguishing of one of the parties. We should think of General Sherman. At the beginning of the Civil War, Sherman was in California, and he's widely quoted as saying that once the American Civil War had started, the only way to solve this issue was the physical elimination of the class of individuals who were the ruling class of the Confederacy. Food for thought. And he later boiled that down to about 300,000 people who were going to keep fighting until something stopped them. And that's about what happened. If you look at the statistics, right, that is about the Confederate casualty count. And similarly, of course, perhaps even more brutal in the Russian Civil War. But what I'm trying to point to is the fact that indeed, Kerry, you're right. Sometimes there is only a military solution. There is no political solution. If there is no political solution, part of it is the fault of Kerry for continuing to encourage these extremists, the death squads, and also failing to crack down on Saudi Arabia. Obama is even going to Saudi Arabia. He's not going there to deliver a stern lecture, I don't think. He's going to go there and sort of in the way poor Letta did, right? Right before Letta fell, he went to the Gulf, and he got what was called a tip. He got a tip of $500 million from one of the potentates of the Gulf. That's the kind of stuff that Obama's going to bring home. All right. So let's hear the Russian response. First, the diplomatic response. Russia, of course, rejects this analysis, and they're right, and I do too. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, on the whole, a reliable source in these kinds of situations. Lavrov says, quote, "There's evidence that certain sponsors of the opposition are starting to create a new structure that would include foes of Assad outside the main opposition group." This is according to Reuters. A course, and this is now is the part to pay special attention to. Hold on to your hat, tighten your helmet strap, get ready to mobilize. Lavrov says a course is being set to move away from the negotiations track and once again place bets on a military scenario. Now, who knows what that could mean? The editorial page line of the Washington Post is bomb, 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 bomb Syria. It's not exactly stated that way, but it's clear enough. Don't read the printed part, only read between the lines. Let's just repeat what Lavrov says. A course is being set to move away from the negotiations track and once again place bets on a military scenario. Russia has delivered what it promised. The Assad government did appear not once but twice. And he says, when we hear that Russia has to take certain steps, it's necessary to remember one simple truth. We have done everything we promised. And it's one of the things with Russian diplomacy, in spite of the Cold War propaganda, pacta sunt servanda. You got to maintain your treaty commitments. So Kerry's mouth, his yap is full of barbaric assault and barrel bombs, starvation, reprehensible, all of this. Russia needs to be part of the solution, not contributing so many more weapons that they're really allowing Assad to double down. Well, again, there is no comparison between the ability of an existing government, United Nations member state, calling for aid from other countries. That's one thing. Fighters, killers, death squads who are smuggled in, bootlegged in by such reactionary centers, such relics of medieval barbarism as Saudi Arabia and the Gulf monarchies. That's not the same thing. It's not comparable. And I don't care about responsibility to protect. Remember, that concept was pioneered by Hitler vis-a-vis the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia. That's where Kerry gets it, so to speak. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, emerging strategic crisis, coming now from the Russian government, right? When Lavrov speaks, I think this has a certain authority. He has a good track record in the current crisis. Remember, he's saying a course is being set to move away from negotiations and once again to place bets on a military scenario. Whose military scenario? Is it the August-September military scenario of fake chemical attack, right? We've got Cy Hirsch pointing to the fact that Obama and Kerry could not know, and Susan Rice could not have known that anything had been done by Assad because all their evidence was that Assad had done basically nothing. And we've got the MIT report that the vectors, right, the rockets, the carriers of the so-called the poison gas, right, that these were coming from areas that were not held by the Assad forces. And we've got all those other stories about how it's the Saudi representatives in these areas were storing things that look like poison gas containers. So we've got a real welter of stuff. And the preponderance of the evidence points to the obvious, a provocation engineered by the death squads themselves to retrieve their military situation, which is desperate. The military solution is not utopian. It is feasible, and this may, unfortunately, turn out to be the way. But, of course, those terrorists, those death squads, are then going to come back to the United States and Western Europe. So thanks to the genius Kerry and the genius Susan Rice and Obama and Haig and Fabius and the rest of them, you got a situation where either you can turn the government of Syria over to death squads, and that then becomes a super Afghanistan, according to their theory, anyway, right? A complete al-Qaeda sanctuary. Or you can have them defeated, and then they scatter all over the world, and you've got a worldwide terrorist plague. And this, of course, it obviously started in Libya in 2011 during the summertime. All right. So, Kiev, we have some good commentary from Dmitry Babich. I recommend him. He delivers commentary on Russia Today, on the Voice of Russia. These are intelligent insights into the situation that, in effect, this is an escalation. They're not protesters now. They're criminals, and again, I would say fascist criminals. And once again, maybe Kerry's Portuguese Salazar-era wife, in other words, redolent of fascism from her entire curriculum vitae. You can see it. Maybe she's the reason that he's so interested in appeasing fascism. Anyway, for the rest of us, it's clear. Appeasement of fascism is always a cover for support of fascism. That's what it was with Sir Neville Chamberlain. Now, given Kiev, Ukraine, tremendous threat. This is where World War III nuclear could conceivably begin, and then this very grave situation in Syria, which is not quite nuclear in the same way, but if it's U.S. and Russia, which it could be, then that's just as bad. Now, here we get the Russian media. In the middle of the Olympics, we have the Russian One. I guess this is the national program, the first program of the Russian television. They have an 85-minute film on Monday evening called The Biochemistry of Treason, an attack on the United States. And they point to the fact that Russia is betrayed every day. Russia is subjected to daily betrayals on the part of the U.S. It is a psychological war, and it's the continuation of Hitler and the Nazis with other means. Yuri Zhukov. Now, Yuri Zhukov is what can we say? He goes back to the Cold War, as I recall, and I'm just thinking, we've got that book, CIA against USSR, right? ЦРУ против СССР. This may be the guy. I don't have this in front of me. So he says the purpose of the United States is the breakup of the Russian Federation. Well, yes, there is something called the Brzezinski Plan. You can read all about it in my book. Somewhat prophetic here. Once again, I'm sorry, but there it is. Obama, the Postmodern Coup, the making of a Manchurian Candidate, and Barack H. Obama, the unauthorized biography, go through the fact that in Russia, it's common to refer in strategic circles to the Brzezinski Plan, which says go beyond the breakup of the Soviet Union to the breakup of the Russian Federation, right? Starting with places like the Trans-Caucasus and Caucasus, right? To Dagestan, Chechnya, Georgia, of course, is long gone, right? Ossetia, and so forth. These places in the ethnic labyrinth of the Caucasus. So, Zhukov, the aim is to create as many traitors as possible who would be able to cooperate with the new occupiers. This, of course, refers to the activity of non-governmental organizations. Our dear friend, Ambassador McFowl, I guess that's about the size of it, a quackademic. He worked with Samantha Power to overthrow Mubarak, was then rewarded with a promotion, became ambassador to Moscow. He's back here now. He doesn't seem to have succeeded, at least during his tenure, but maybe that's not the plan. So the current stuff is interspersed with archive footage of Dr. Goebbels of the Nazi propaganda ministry, alternating with Pussy Riot. Got to remember, Pussy Riot is similar to those Ukrainians, right? Pussy Riot thinks like Chanibok. Pussy Riot are racist, xenophobic, right-wing, They hate people from the Caucasus. They hate anybody south and east, I guess we can say. And there's a big reference to the Vlasov army, right? Vlasov was a Russian officer captured by the Germans and then became the head of a military formation, a kind of SS, which fought alongside the German forces on the Eastern Front, fighting against the Soviets. Captured by the U.S., turned over to the Soviets, executed. And there's a monument to him in Nanuet, New York. This is not wise. Protected by the Russian flag. All right. And so they show a whole bunch of people, Russians, who make these rather naive statements. For example, one of them, Ilya Lazarenko, says the United States is the leader of world civilization. Americans are kind by nature. Dear friends, I'm against hatred, but this is a little bit naive. This is a little bit starry-eyed. Now, just some examples of this. Now, this is not. It's not like this is in a vacuum. Washington Post, Sunday, right, February 16th, the day before yesterday. The cartoon is Assad with a big barrel or steel barrel, weapons of mass destruction, chemicals, crossed out chemicals, put in starvation, and Assad is there. The drumbeat here in the Washington Post, whether it's an editorial, a cartoon, or an op-ed, it's essentially continuous now, right? Or sometimes they focus on Putin. So there is a growing hysteria in the U.S. ruling elite, and this takes the form of David Ignatius, right? Somebody who is, what can we say, not alien to the U.S. intelligence community. He's got this paean to the various dissidents, right? And especially Alexei Navalny. We'll get to Navalny and Pussy Riot in just a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We've got David Ignatius. This is a fawning sycophant of Kerry, I'm afraid, in most of these situations. He goes through the wonders of the Russian opposition. Notice that these people represent virtually nothing. And one of the people that he singles out for special praise is, of course, the feisty Alexei Navalny, who is presented as a fighter against corruption, right? Corruption. Remember that Alexei Navalny started his fight against corruption when he was between Harvard and Yale, as I recall. From the United States, he did it. Gold medal determination. Amid the television extravaganza of Sochi, I had a chance to visit with a Russian whistleblower named Sergei Kolesnikov. This guy exposes corruption, so he's a great hero for David Ignatius. And here we go. This is now, I remember when David Ignatius wrote about Obama, that Obama was like Frank Sinatra and other people in suits, cool and never missed a beat. Well, in this case, it goes like this. Here's the purple prose from David Ignatius from Navalny. This feisty determination is epitomized by a young anti-corruption activist named Alexei Navalny. He famously called Putin's United Russia Party, quote, the party of crooks and thieves, and castigated him during Russia's 2011 parliamentary election and 2012 election. So they want to have Navalny and his anti-corruption foundation. They post something called Sochi.fbk.info, and they have Olympic events that are supposed to satirize Putin. These are about as funny as the old cartoons in Pravda. Not funny. Champion of corruption race. Classic embezzlement. Verbal freestyle. Pairs contracting. Skating the figures. Boondoggles. They get upset. Look, the Washington Post is scandalized that if you do a road-rail combination over 30 miles, that can cost $7 million. Yes, of course. We have a road here just north of Washington called the Intercounty Connector, which connects two interstates that were previously, you had to go all the way down to the Beltway. And it's fewer miles than that. It's about 20, and the cost of that was about $3 billion, and there was no rail link involved. What do you think? This is totally ridiculous. So scraping the bottom of the barrel. And remember, Navalny, xenophobic, hates Chechens, hates people from the Caucasus, just same kind of right-wing stuff. So what we're seeing is a coalescence of this regurgitation of fascism in the form of the anti-Russian people. Now, there are a lot of right-wingers for whom this is a kind of in Europe especially, right-wingers in Europe who are sympathetic to Putin, but now they see that the real, fascist brands are coming out against him. So this is now the situation. What can be done? Well, first thing is don't trust the Democratic Party. Right? Just remember that this is all happening under the one, Obama. You were warned. Obama, the postmodern coup, the making of a Manchurian candidate, and the Barack H. Obama, the unauthorized biography. I would not argue that Obama is personally the prime mover planning this stuff, but after all, it's going on his watch. He is politically responsible. He's letting this happen. But the criminal energy types, clearly, John Forbes Kerry, Susan Rice, and then this diplomatic corps, people like Piat, the U.S. ambassador to Kiev. We had Ann Patterson, who was the great sweetheart and groupie of Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood in Cairo, and she's now back. She's in the process of being made Assistant Secretary of State for Middle East affairs. So you got Ann Patterson, Assistant Secretary for the Middle East, and then, of course, Victoria Nuland, Assistant Secretary for European. This is a very bad combination. This is being done in your name, people. So get on Twitter with this stuff, and it's time to expose these people, time to subject them to an annihilating critique. Twitter is made to order for this stuff. We need to see a kind of a cascade of attacks to denounce Kerry. If you want to get some good lines on Kerry, when he was put into office, I think I was one of very few who reminded you about Skull and Bones and some other things, and even his recklessness, right? The fact that Kerry, at the wheel of a sports car in Brittany, France, near the family's palatial estate there in Brittany, France, right? That he was involved in an automobile accident, reminding us of the famous exchange between F. Scott Fitzgerald and Hemingway, where F. Scott Fitzgerald, a somewhat deeper thinker, at least at times, said to Hemingway, you know, the rich are fundamentally different from us. And he meant different in their values, the way they think. They're almost a different species. Yeah, it's true. And Hemingway says, yeah, they have more money, showing what a superficial character he was. So tragically, Fitzgerald was not around very long because of his alcoholism, but at least he had that part straight. So Kerry is the example of such people. And if we look at the sociology of this, by the way, I noticed the Huffington Post and others making a big deal about how the Wall Street class in general is going bonkers, and I think that that argument has significant merit. And we're thinking in particular about that character Perkins. Right, there were some interviews made of some very rich finance oligarchs who were complaining about their plight, that they're being dissed, that they're not receiving the adulation that they feel that they're entitled to. And obviously, in a depression, right, if you're rich, you realize you have privileges that you did not earn and which have nothing to do with reality, and other people are suffering and you're lolling in the lap of luxury. So there's always a great fear among the wealthy ruling class in such a depression. So remember that Perkins tried to turn this around, saying that, in effect, the rich were victims of a new Kristallnacht, Reichskristallnacht, November, right after the Munich sellout, indeed made possible by the Munich sellout. There were these attacks by Nazi hooligans on Jewish shops, synagogues, and so forth. So according to this finance oligarch, predator, Perkins, today the 1% is subjected to the same thing. Well, this is obviously insane. But in the society we live in, if you have privileges, you want to keep them, you've got to portray yourself as a victim. That's sort of the new twist. But if you look at Perkins and other people, how crazy they are, you'd have to ask yourself then, well, if you take people with similar mentality, similar sociology, similar backgrounds, similar cultural values, and so forth, you put them in the State Department and they make policy, what's going to come out, right? What kind of lunacy? So Kerry's foreign policy in Syria and in Ukraine is about as crazy as this lunatic Perkins. So that's the problem. So it's time to raise the hue and cry, fire these people. Any federal officer, any federal official can be impeached. So impeach Kerry, impeach Rice, impeach some of these ambassadors. This would be a relatively refreshing alternative to the current situation. And I guess we've come to the end of our segment. We'll be back in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. Again, we're recording a little bit earlier than usual, but I think we still have a pretty good overview of what's actually going on. Let's talk a little bit about economics. So Matteo Renzi, the neoliberal pretty boy of Italy, is advancing towards the seizure of power in that country. A lot of difficulty, though, on the way. There are a lot of people he's trying to get into his cabinet that will not accept his bids. Let me just point out a couple of other interesting things about Renzi. He has an economic guru, and his economic guru happens to be a guy called Yoram Gutgeld. Yoram Gutgeld is an Israeli citizen who has operated in Milan, Italy, for quite a while, and he's a consultant, and seems to be the guy who's feeding Renzi the austerity proposals. And remember, the big thing with Renzi is an anti-worker of the labor code. Italy has something called Article 18 of the labor legislation. Hard to fire people. Now, that was significantly gutted under Monti by his labor minister, the infamous Fornero, a woman. Remember the one who cried? She said, "Oh, I'm so sorry to do this, right? This hurts me more than it hurts you." And then she went ahead and smashed the lives of millions of people. They can be fired. Renzi wants to take that all the way. For 3 years, everybody would be precarious in any job. So the assumption is that Renzi will consolidate that government before the end of this week. By the way, he's the English language commentators have understood that he's called the scrapper. So they say the scrapper is now in a big scrap. No, it's not scrap in the sense of scrappy like you fight. It's scrapping in terms of junk. He's rotamatore. He junks people. He throws people on the human junk heap. And, of course, up to now, the people going on the human junk heap are supposedly people like Massimo D'Alema of the PD party and a bunch of others. And basically, if you're over 50 or something, he wants to junk you. But I think this is going to acquire a new significance, right? The junk man, the scrapper, is going to throw millions on the human junk heap, the human scrap heap, if he gets a chance. So don't be fooled. Remember, any country in Europe, you have an alternative to vote for Alexis Tsipras and his list. Now, we just had Tsipras in Paris, in Rome. In Rome, it's going to be a list of people. Don't focus on the list of people that are essentially representing Tsipras in Italy or any place else. Don't even focus on the parties. This is not essential. Read what I've written on Tarpley.net. It's a contribution to the Press TV website. The principal idea is get this going sociologically, structurally, and we can then take care of the individual people. And remember, Tsipras has shown great talent for purging failed leaders, defeated leaders, people responsible for numerous defeats. Right? People like Genoam Chomsky and others would not be able to last very long in Syriza. Right? Most of them have been ousted, and I would hope that Tsipras would use his talents inside now his own combination to purge these failed blowhards. I mean, somebody like Guido Viale of Lotta Continua, who used the occasion of introducing Renzi in Rome to make a big plea for ecology and green consciousness and so forth. This is what you do not need. And notice in Tsipras' standard speech, very little about the eco-freak side of things, because, of course, José Bove of the European Green Party, right, the so-called peasant. He's a peasant who's been in the European Parliament for 2 or 3 terms. That wonderful Rousseauvian peasant, José Bove, they'll monopolize all the green stuff. Now, there was this past weekend the convention of the German party, Die Linke, and Tsipras was supposed to go to that, to Berlin, and be part of it, or wherever else. Maybe it's not in Berlin, but it was held somewhere in Germany, maybe Hamburg. Tsipras was supposed to go. He says he was sick, and we hope that he's okay, because we need him healthy. We need him campaigning for the next several months and way beyond. Interesting, you look at Die Linke webpage, and I tried to find something about Tsipras. The most recent news about Tsipras they have is back in last autumn, maybe November. And I'm wondering, is Die Linke opportunistically not talking about him because he's a Greek and because they know that there are some chauvinists even among their voters, right, the 10% or whatever they have? You never know, but it's a very strange phenomenon, right, that they're supposedly supporting Tsipras for European Commission president, but you don't find that anywhere on their website. So what's going on with Die Linke? Here in the United States, we've had some bad news. The United Auto Workers has failed in their attempt to get an election to win the election at the Volkswagen plant in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It was not a complete blowout against the union, but they failed to get a majority. Many problems here. The UAW, unfortunately, no longer has the image of a fighting union. You'll remember that in 2009, 2010, during the time of Ratner the Rat in the Obama administration, the UAW essentially allowed all of their plants in Michigan to be screwed down to the level of the union-busting right-to-work states, so that the advantage of joining that union became less. And they did that, obviously, to play ball with Obama. So they are, in some ways, they're reaping the unfortunate results of their opportunism and failure to fight. And, of course, it's a union now with a center of gravity among retirees, and that will not do the job. So some form of insurgency against this UAW leadership is probably in order, although I would say vote for them anyway. Remember, it's structural. It doesn't depend on the individuals. You've probably by now seen that famous chart, which essentially goes from the upper left-hand corner to the lower right corner, trade union membership and U.S. standard of living, and they go together. The one declines, the other declines. This is more or less independent of the mentality of the individual trade union leaders or their corporate culture or whatever it is, right? It's kind of like a sacrament, right? It works independent of the state of mind of who's doing it. I would do anything to, or virtually anything, to strengthen the trade union movement. But you have to face facts. It's not a fighting union. Here's the other thing. The Democratic Party, with Obama, made a big deal about card check. In other words, why do we have to have this election in the first place? Why do we have to have this entire procedure the way it is? Why not streamline it, right? Why not allow people to vote individually, put it on a postcard, send it in, and that's a vote? That was supposed to be passed in 2009, 2010. They had Obama, the Democrats had the House and the Senate. They didn't pass it. They didn't bring it up, as far as I know. It got nowhere. So the Democratic Party is rotten, and here's the problem. And now you see the result, that the UAW can't unionize the Chattanooga plant. I also would say, think about Wisconsin, all of that suffering, all of that work to get the recall petition against the fascist Governor Walker, and then it turns out that the vehicle for your hopes is the Democratic Party mayor of Milwaukee, who is a hack, who won't talk about workers' issues, and generally, therefore, courts defeat and got defeated. So there's that. Now, in terms of the general state of economics, interesting phenomenon in the Washington Post. Larry Summers is out there pontificating that the way to fight inequality is to to increase taxes on rich people. I'm sorry, it's not so much the individual income tax, it's the 1% Wall Street sales tax, simply because the money available there is several orders of magnitude greater, astronomically greater. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now, one last item from the ongoing debate. People know Robert J. Samuelson, nepotist. He has a column because his father was a famous economist. I don't see any other reason. But his latest column is called Economists in the Dark. And he's wailing and whining. He says these are hard times for economists. Their reputations are tarnished. Their favorite doctrines are damaged. Among their most prominent thinkers, there is no consensus as to how or whether governments in advanced countries can improve lackluster recoveries. All in all, the situation recalls a cruel joke. Here's his joke. How many economists does it take to change a light bulb? Answer, none. When the one they used in graduate school goes out, they sit in the dark. They don't know what to do. There's a world depression, and all of their various stratagems have failed. So we're looking for new ideas on the economic front. And in that spirit, always alert to possible political candidacies that show merit. We're now going to introduce you to a gentleman who is running for United States Congress, United States House of Representatives, in the northeast Pennsylvania area, Monroe County, but it's a large district. We're going to hear about that. And it's Adam Rodriguez. Adam, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Webster. Thank you for that very kind introduction.
Let me let's just locate it for people. Tell us where you're a candidate. In other words, what cities, what counties, and then you take it from there.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's Pennsylvania. It's the Northeast PA. It's called the 10th District, and it's gigantic. It was gerrymandered and during the 2010 election after the Tea Party candidate Barletta was put in office. So they were able to gerrymander the district to propitiate the current congressional representative, who's a Republican. He happens to be Tom Marino. And it really just it's totally contiguous with the recent fracking industry, because obviously they would want to put someone in there that's a demagogue that appeals to the mostly kind of rural Tea Party faction. It's a heavily Republican district, but it would appeal to them for their most kind of like fear-mongering, baser instincts. and then at the same time be able to grease the wheels in terms of the fracking industry not coming down for any kind of demands to make sure that they're paying their workers properly, or that they're hiring unionized workers or training the indigenous population. That's all just thrown out the door, and it's just it really is an exploitation to the highest degree, where the corporations are putting in the minimal amount. So, so that's the area that I'm in. It's called the 10th. It's been a Republican stronghold. It's actually been a reactionary stronghold basically throughout its entire history. But I think with, going back to what you were saying before in regards to these economists being in the dark, it's because of their history and their legacy has been airbrushed out of history for the most part, and that's the American system. So I'm in the process of starting to educate this district, going around to the different committees, the Democratic committees throughout the district, and I'm getting a very positive response. Coming out with the 1% Wall Street sales tax, coming out with, the federal nationalization of the Federal Reserve, but more or less on the installment plan, because, you want to show people the efficacy of this over time so that they see that it has benefits to it, so that they can say, oh, this is not, a statist bank, so that's only going to, inflame the libertarians out there saying this is the statist bank. Well, if it's the statist bank, why are we getting so much positive feedback, and why is the economy actually improving once we get to that point? But we got to get to that point first. So it's going to be it's an uphill battle. The last Democrat that held office there was considered to be a blue dog. His name is Chris Carney. He was two-term, and he was defeated by Marino. But previous to that, I think the last Democrat he might have had in that seat was maybe during the 1940s, very sporadic, and then all the way back into the 1850s, 1860s, where, this was the party of the Southern, I guess it would be Pillface or Copperhead, So, it really was. It's a very reactionary, rural area. This is Appalachia. It's beautiful. It's a gigantic district that covers nearly half the entire state, practically, and it would be a major coup and a major upset if I were to get into the primary, defeat my primary candidate, who happens to be another Democrat named Scott Brion. Obviously, there might be an independent out there. I really don't know. But then, if I were to get into the general election and get up against some of this Tea Party faction is very strong out there. I'm looking forward to maybe getting in debate, sparring with them a little bit, and really kind of giving them a little bit of a political education on the political economics of the American system. So I'm very excited about it, but I think that I'm very grateful that you're having me on, because I need funds. I really do, because I'm seeing within the Democratic Party itself, going throughout the different committees, I've been to at least 4 so far, I'm seeing such a great response from my message that I don't want to give this up, and I'm not going to give it up. I mean, I'm going to go through the signature period and get on the ballot, but it would be a heck of a lot easier if I had people helping me financially. So if anyone can donate any kind of funds to my campaign, it would be very, very helpful. It would make things a lot easier. I want to be able to be out there full time every day in my district, in the 10th district, getting signatures, getting on the ballot, and then taking it from there in the general election, in the primary. So if you would like to help my campaign, it's adamforpa.com. It's very simple. We have a donate page. You can donate there. We also obviously will accept checks, and if you go to the website, there's a mailing address where you can send your checks to. So if anyone would like to help, it would be greatly appreciated, and I would go a long way, because I'm telling you, I went out to a committee meeting in the Western District. This is like all the way on the other side of halfway across the state, practically, right? At least 3 or 4 hour drive for me.
Sounds like it takes a lot of gas.
There's a lot of gas. I actually had to stay overnight up in Binghamton because the next day I went over to Susquehanna to go to another committee meeting because, they're all on different days throughout the month, So you try to work it so that you hit 3 or 4 and a shot and then go back and lick your wounds and then go back out again, So it's actually a lot of fun. So I went to the one in Tioga County, and it was great. I got a fantastic response. And
hang on, Adam, hold that thought. The music is telling us a hard break is coming. This is our system here. We'll be right back with Adam Rodriguez. It's adamforpa.com, running in the 10th of Northeast Pennsylvania for Congress. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We're in the midst of a very interesting interview with a candidate for the United States House of Representatives. It's Adam Rodriguez, running in the 10th District, Northeast Pennsylvania. And the website is adamforpa.com. And, well, you've heard it. He's for the 1% Wall Street sales tax and the nationalization of the Federal Reserve, but including the step-by-step installment plan, I guess, the nationalization of the Fed to get out of the Depression. Adam, let me just ask you a couple of quick questions. Any big town in that district people can think of?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, there's Williamsport, which is a beautiful town. It's a pretty big little city. It sits like right on the edge of this western tier of the district. It's flanked by, I think they call it the Endless Mountains, that whole region there, but I think it's on the Susquehanna, actually. And then there's also Carbondale, which is Carbondale is part in the 10th and also in the 17th, so it's kind of split. And then there's still Stroudsburg, where I live near, is a pretty big town.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a small town. It's pretty big. And then down towards, I think it's Lewisburg, is actually a pretty big town. And then you go up towards the northern part of the district. I guess Susquehanna is not too small. It's a big area, But those are the main. Scranton. Scranton is kind of like right on the border of the district, because the district they cut out all the Democrats when they gerrymandered the district. It's unbelievable the way they. It's unbelievable.
Right, I think that Scranton, that probably helps people if it's generally in that area. That's all. Right, Scranton is Lunch Bucket Joe, right? Biden.
I'm sorry.
He claims to be.
Yeah, Lunch Bucket. Yeah. That's where he's from. Yeah. They all love.
All right.
So
now listen. Let me ask you another one. When is the primary?
Okay, the primary begins a week after petitioning. So the petitioning ends the 11th of March. So I need to be in Harrisburg with all my ballots in. Actually, on the 10th, I'm submitting everything on the 10th. Hopefully, I'll have everything done and everything back to the rest of the district. So from the 11th to the 17th, there's like a week where if they want to contest any signatures and bring litigation, right? So then the 18th until basically you have a 2-month period. So February, March, April, and May. In May, that's when the primary is, the actual election of the Democratic
So in midday.
So,
all right, but everything's front-loaded. You've got to get everything done by the 11th of March.
Yeah, basically. Yeah,
all
they give you a very short window.
People who want to help you have got to go into high gear and act now, right? Don't wait for next week's program.
Right.
But this is the time to come forward.
Let me give out my phone number if somebody's on this, listening to the program in the Northeast PA, and if they happen to be in the 10th, and if they happen to be a Democrat, even better. If you want to call me, 570-807-9729. Give me a call, and we'll try to work it out where you can come into my area, because there's a lot of Democrats around the Stroudsburg area that are in the 10th, because Stroudsburg's actually split. So,
Adam, you were kind of quick with that number. Can you repeat the number slowly and clearly?
Yeah. 570-807-9729 is my personal phone number. So if you want to call me on my cell, that'd be great, and we'll try to figure out how you can help us out.
Okay, and let me just to put it in perspective now. Suppose you're sitting at SUNY Binghamton. It's not that far away. If you're in northern New Jersey, not that far away. And even these places, sort of anything north of Philadelphia, not that far, right?
Right, right. Well, they would be useful in that they could drive people that might not have a car around to the different houses, because we're in the process of developing walk lists so they can go out and just call people up, go to their house, get the signature, and then go to the next one, because I got to get 1,000 signatures in like basically a 2.5 week span. So I really got to move here, you know?
All right, so people should come forward on that too. But again, the idea is everything front-loaded. Time to get moving right now. Now, let me ask you: you've gotten some coverage. I was surprised to see how much coverage you've gotten. There's something called Politics PA.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Online, you're sort of a typical state-level blog, but local papers have written you up. You went to a convention a little while ago, or one of the Democratic Party, I guess the state convention?
I went to the state committee meeting. That was very interesting, a real eye-opener there. I mean, I'm shaking hands with basically every major political operative within the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania that's out there. I met every single gubernatorial candidate, every single lieutenant candidate, and actually that was really good for me, because when I started laying out my plan, you have these receptions, and you're, just kind of sitting around, kind of just talking, general light chatter. I'm kind of laying out my plan to them, and they're all like, "You got to stick with this. You really got to stick with this." And this is no one's saying this. And you're the only candidate that's out there that we know right now that's talking about directly the sales tax issue and the nationalization of the Federal Reserve, but laying it out so that people can understand it clearly and see that this would be so beneficial. And so, it would really be a revolution in world history if we were to get the permanent affixation of of something like a nationalized Federal Reserve or another national bank. It really would be a momentous event, and so that's what I'm looking to do.
It would be a major break in the international system of privately controlled central banks, and of course that's the key to jobs, as we've been harping on this program for years, right? You have credit creation through the Fed for job creation. Right. Let me just.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Well, I always try to put it in the context of this Trans-Pacific Partnership thing, which is like a total abrogation of our nation's sovereignty. And I'm like, look, we're at every front. You're relinquishing your rights under your Constitution, and under we have no sovereignty as a nation. So this would be, like if you're going to climb a mountain, if you're going to climb Mount Everest, you have to approach that mountain properly. This is the first stage. You get that national bank, you're reinstating your sovereignty as a nation over a private cabal of bankers, which is what is happening. And they totally understand that. They get that immediately. So it's really, that's what I'm saying. Like, if I can get any help from anybody, I got to keep this going and win and get into that general election. And try to teach some of these Tea Party and libertarian types a little bit about their past, and maybe they'll think twice about debt and money and all these other, kind of like really just, obsessions that they have, So.
And that perhaps some of them will understand that what's required is not an audit of the Fed, but actual nationalization in whole or in part. Just to stick to these responses that you've been getting, because I thought this was interesting. You told me as we were preparing for the show that the idea that if the Republican Party civil war goes on and they manage to disqualify themselves as a national party, that there are fault lines in the Democratic Party. And I think you said one person commented that the split or the division of the Democratic Party was already in progress.
Yeah, that was somebody that I've become kind of close to. He's a really good friend. I mean, I met a lot of great people with the Democratic Party. I want to encourage anyone that's out there that's thinking about maybe using the Democrats as a vehicle to get this message out. By all means, go ahead and start to do it, because that split that Webster just said, it's been identified. And what he mentioned, this friend of mine said, it was when Obama refused to, going back to the 2013 sequester, or the possible sequestration and the financial cliff or fiscal cliff, that Obama had refused to enforce the 14th Amendment, and that was people were so frustrated with that. It was
okay. Hang on to that thought. We'll be back in just a second on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, and we're learning that spring is coming early to Northeast Pennsylvania. It's Adam Rodriguez running for Congress, U.S. House of Representatives, in the 10th District, associated with places like Williamsport, Stroudsburg, and sort of a district that sort of gets close to Scranton, home of Lunch Bucket Joe. Send him a message. So Adam Rodriguez, issues are nationalize the Fed, 1% Wall Street sales tax, and no to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and also no to fracking, needing modern energy production, not this primitive 19th century fracking.
Exactly. Well, just to kind of just finish up on your point about this fault line that's taking place within the party, it's evident to everybody. A woman that's running for state representative's position up in the area, she said that's happened already. Another person has been saying this to me. There's an awareness within the party now more than ever that reform must take place now, and if that's going to take the place of a visible split, then so be it. The finance end, the Wall Street wing of the party needs to go, and the fight is on because Pennsylvania is suffering heavily under the yoke of the Koch brothers and their this ALEC nonsense. And all this, fear mongering, and then focusing on trying to get a hold of privatizing everything, trying to get a hold of, pensions so they can just loot the entire thing, and the pensions at the educational level, pensions at the municipal level. They want to privatize it all, and it's because the Koch brothers came into this state in the early part of the 2000s, even before that, really, and they were already starting to seed money throughout the state to take the entire legislature and also municipalities and even school boards and turn them as Republican as they could, and people have had it. So it's really I kind of feel like Pennsylvania is really ground zero for this kind of fight that you mentioned, and just get a big pike pole, get it in there, and try to widen it as quickly as possible, but not before those Republicans go down first, right, Webb?
I hope so. Now, let me just ask you, we're in our last segment now. We got to be a little bit quicker. Let me just ask you, in a district like that, how about the United States Postal Service as an issue?
Oh, it's huge because, like I said, you have this endless mountains region, which is kind of like the northern flanks of like the former coal mining areas. It has a prehistoric beauty. It's amazing. But at any rate, it's very rural. If those people were to not have any local post offices and it would be all privatized, they would suffer greatly. And actually, they're trying to entice businesses to move out into that area from the metropolitan area around New York and New Jersey, because they're trying to say, well, you have low real estate, costs are lower out here. There's no modern transportation. That whole, trunk rail system comes to the state that's never been built. That's one of the things I'm going to push heavily is a maglev high-speed rail system coming right through the center of that state on through Scranton on into Chicago. But then basically, if you don't have a post office in that whole area, how are you going to be able to have a modern, efficient transportation and be able to have trade? It's unbelievable. So, and
exactly.
then
also, it would be a death sentence for these areas. But pushing ahead now, in that primary, or just after mid-May, and we'll check the date, you're going against a guy called Scott Breon. Can you tell us about your immediate primary opponent?
Yeah, well, Scott's, a little different. He comes out of a fracking background or a real estate. He's a venture capitalist. That's what he bills himself as, who went to the Wharton School, says he was able to pay his way through the Wharton School by baling hay. That's a lot of hay to bale at the Wharton School. That's
baling hay or bailing out?
I don't know, but he says he worked pretty hard to get through to get through school, baling hay and doing things like very kind of like farm work and stuff. I guess he's from the area. He lives around Williamsport or Tioga. But, I mean, his thing, he's not coming out against fracking. He's not talking about any of the issues that I am. And I'm being seen by everyone that I've talked to so far, and also the local media and the outlets that have done articles on me so far. I'm being seen as the progressive, as the liberal, quote unquote. I'm being seen as a possible real change within that district. And for a lot of people, kind of see him as maybe just another blue dog. I mean, I don't know. I haven't heard him speak. I talked to him a few times, very briefly, but I don't know much about his platform. He says he wants to get the money out of politics. Well, the guy's got a $2.5 million war chest, so another reason why I'm going to need some funds out there, people. So if you could help me out here,
it's just another process reform that does not provide help for families struggling for survival. So it's Adam Rodriguez. The website, Adam for PA. Can you repeat your phone number for people who want to volunteer?
Sure, that'd be great. 570-807-9729 is my cell. Call me anytime, even in the middle of the night. I'll wake up. Don't worry about it. And I keep
I guess you have a contact feature. Adam for PA has a contact feature. Why don't you give an email address?
Oh, sure. Of course, yeah. I'm sorry. AdamForPA@gmail.com if you want to email me. Okay? And if you go to my webpage...
@gmail.com.
Correct. And then if you go to my webpage, there's all links to my email, I have a Facebook page, a Twitter page. We're just in the process of kind of getting our bearings. We did start late. This kind of all came at me basically in late December, early January is when things started rolling. So we got a little bit of a late start, but we're doing our best. And I think we're going to make a real go of this. So, and thanks for having me on, Webster. I appreciate it.
Well, it's a very impressive array of issues, and people that listen to this broadcast, I think, are sensitized. And I think they're well educated in a lot of these. So it's a choice between a venture capitalist. And I think once you know he's a venture capitalist and a fracker, that essentially tells you what you need to know. And somebody who's going for the nationalized Fed, the 1% Wall Street sales tax, saving the United States Postal Service, no fracking. I think that's a pretty clear choice.
Right, exactly. So, I'm sensing already that the Rion camp is getting a little worried, even though I'm just a little guy out here, because I think they know if I can get out there and do this full time and get my message out, I'm not going to need a lot of money. I'm not, maybe later on in the general, but I'm not going to need a lot of money to get on the ballot and maybe win the primary. I'm kind of convinced of that, because I'm focusing on getting out, meeting the different committees, telling them my message. They're very receptive to it. They love it. They have a lot of questions. They're asking me all different types of questions just beyond the sales tax issue. Where do I stand on social issues? I say, okay, fine, I'll answer these, but I think we all agree that it's the economic issues that need to be dealt with first. Let's heal the nation and economically, and the rest will take care of itself over time. So look, thank you very much for having me on, though, Webster.
Absolutely. Now, remember, people, the limit for a federal campaign is $2,600 in the current cycle. So you have a wide margin, and the website is Adam for PA.
If you have a check, I'd prefer a check, because the PayPal they take their cut, and you can mail the check to me directly. You can go to my website. There's a mailing address there. It clears faster in the bank, which is always good. So, this is going to go for a very useful function, and I'll be out there every day, swinging away, fighting that, going at this. And I never thought I'd be doing this as a Democrat, to be quite honest with you, but I'm very happy that I made the decision to do it.
Well, of course, in some ways, the Democratic primary remains a viable vehicle to bring around other ideas, which are not, they're not the ideas of Lunch Bucket Joe. and the current administration. So that's Adam Rodriguez, 10th District of Northeast Pennsylvania, Williamsport, Stroudsburg, such places. AdamForPA.com. It's AdamForPA@gmail.com, and you've heard the number. So I think our course is clear. So thank you very much, Adam. You're going to check in again from week to week, I hope, and give us progress reports. And we'll see you next week on World Crisis Radio. Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. We're recording our program a little bit early this week for various reasons, but we have plenty to report, and we hope to bring you in the second hour the first of a series highlighting various candidates for public office in the United States, but not even only that, but in the United States especially, who have taken up some aspect of the elements, more or less, of the recovery program. Remember, we are in a world economic depression of unimaginable proportions, worse than the 1930s in many respects. This is the reality. A lot of people can't see it. It's a very interesting epistemological problem, why some people can't see the existence of a depression. We have Republicans in the United States. We have a lot of petty bourgeois in Germany, right-wing petty bourgeois in Germany who just refuse to admit that we're not in normal times. But now, the leading edge is this emerging strategic crisis. Right now, the Sochi Olympics are about, 5 or 6 or so days from concluding. I think they conclude on this coming Sunday. And we've thought that at least dangerous than anything in the Middle East ever possibly could be, because in Ukraine you have the immediate potential for the collision of nuclear armed forces, Polish NATO troops coming in, or Baltic states, but Poland in particular would be inclined to meddle. And on the other hand, Russian forces assisting people in the eastern Ukraine and trying to keep the country together. And both of those could call on nuclear forces. So this is absolutely critical. Now, any rational foreign minister would focus in particular on working with an existing government, a United Nations member state, legally constituted, recognized by the United States, no problem with this, to try to empty out the square, remove the public health menace, and above all, prevent further radicalization. But that is not the line. Now, it goes together, I'm afraid, with a new drive for war in the Middle East. This is now getting to be this 1-2 punch, right? It's the 1956 Suez crisis plus the Hungarian crisis. We may be looking at something like this under much worse conditions. The Montreux-Geneva talks, second round, ended on Friday into Saturday, and have led essentially to nothing except a commitment to meet once again. And no specifics. Now, if you followed last week, we went through the attempt to relieve Homs into these uniforms. They might have stolen them from deposits in Ukraine. They may come from Poland or the Baltic states or elsewhere. But the fact is that you now have this eerie phenomenon of the uniformed riot police and others on the side of the Ukrainian authorities, legally constituted government, UN member state, and all that. And they're being attacked by others who are not just paramilitary, but practically militarized, except that they're fascists. They're not protesters. They're criminals, but their doctrine is exquisitely fascistic. It is essentially the Waffen-SS Galicia division, which is active on that Maidan or Majdanek square. So 5 dead, and I guess these are demonstrators who got themselves killed. The problem here is Yanukovych. His policy, the only words for Yanukovych's policy is chicken Kiev. Yanukovych has got to drop the chicken Kiev and go for law and order. And anybody can see, for example, one of the requests, the defense ministry, the Ukrainian defense ministry asked the demonstrators to please stop occupying one of their buildings. Let's imagine this. So you've got demonstrators hold Lafayette Park and McPherson Square and have fortified them, and they've also taken over, let's say, the Navy Annex. How about that? Or there's an import from the Russian side. There would not be anything particular done that might get in the way of those games, but obviously the Anglo-Americans think differently. Now, here's the specifics right now. As of this morning, we have a new round of riots in Kiev by the fascist opposition, by Yats and Klitsch. Yatsenyuk, candidate for prime minister. Klitschko, the punch-drunk, brain-damaged, concussed Poluka, who they want to install as puppet president. Yats would be the prime minister with his greater experience. And then, of course, Tjanibok, the Himmler, I guess, of the situation. And they had somewhat calmed down in the last couple of weeks. What happened here was on Monday, the 17th of February, President's Day here in the United States, Yanukovych executed an amnesty whereby some of the worst fascist hooligans were released from jail as an attempt to have reconciliation with these fascists. But as Sir Neville Chamberlain found out, you can't appease fascists successfully. Like blackmail, they escalate their demands. So one day after a lot of these principal hooligans were released, they're back attacking. And what they have now is uniforms. I don't know where they got an army building here over by Union Station. And suppose those were being held by armed demonstrators. And how long do you think that would last, right? But, of course, in Kiev, if you kick these fascists out, then you're going to be attacked by the Western media as being an oppressor. These camps, I think it's just a question of time before you get typhus, typhoid, paratyphoid in those camps. That might have a sobering effect on these on the hooligans gathered there, right? And remember, if you join that, you've essentially surrendered your political initiative to Yats and Klitsch. And we know from Nuland in her famous obscene telephone call that those are the people the U.S. wants to install as a puppet state. Lots of Molotov cocktails. Today there was a real bombardment, a barrage of Molotov cocktails. It looked like quite a few cops were getting burned. So this has essentially passed any possible limit. In the session of the Ukrainian Rada, and if you think back to previous times, that term Ukrainian Rada brings a shudder. One of the fascist parliamentarians says, in effect, that violence is the only answer, that Yanukovych and his group only understand the language of violence. This is deplorable, and I've stressed again and again, the Ukraine is more